Welcome to the DevReady podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today we're joined by Paul Arnost. Paul is the founder of FinalCall, a real estate technology company that's looking to change the way we buy and sell real estate. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you coming on board and sharing your journey through FinalCall that started, back in 2015 from what I recall?
Yeah, 2015 was the conception of both the idea and the business, although as we all know, you can have the idea of the well before the business gets established.
Yes, very true.
Sometimes it's a big lead, a lot of lead time on that.
Yeah, it can be, yes. So let's dive a little bit back in the history of Paul. So where did you start out and how did you start your journey, especially career-wise?
Yes, so I went to Melbourne High School, obviously academic-based school, and I had no real interest in university back then. I was more interested in pursuing a career of professional musician, which, was
Cool.
was okay at the time, but didn't
Did you
quite
sing
pan
or
out.
play instrument? What did you do?
I was a vocalist
Okay, nice.
in a heavy metal band.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So all this does is prove that you can have many careers over the space of
Yes.
years.
Yeah, from heavy metal vocalist through to startup founder, very different.
That
Yeah.
is definitely something I'd say. So then, went straight out of high school, started working for the banks. So I
Yep.
was working at ANZ Bank and
Uh-huh.
just worked my way through there in various operational and project roles into business analysis and project management. And, these are skills that I highly recommend everyone should pick up if they're ever looking to start a tech-based business in some way, shape, or form. Because, just having a bit of knowledge on how to understand and design processes alone will save you an inordinate amount of time.
Dig into that a bit. Designing processes. What does that mean?
So, one of the fundamental things that you need to think about whenever you're designing a new platform, system, function, is you need to understand, the interactions that the various participants will have along the way. Where are their decision points? What could those decision points branch into? And then what are the impacts along the way? So you need to be thinking about the inputs, the outputs, in terms of not necessarily a data structure or anything as complicated as that, but if you do this in a process, you would anticipate that it has one of these 2, 3, 4 outcomes. And by being able to structure that in an appropriate way, you'll actually be able to then watch it flow. You'll be able to understand pain points. You'll be able to understand points that will potentially be bottlenecks, and ultimately, that process background helped me do what I did with FinalCall, because it was all about process.
And I think that's one thing that really non-techs don't get a grip on. Building tech is all process driven, so we are digging into process, understanding it, and there's, like you said, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that happen from one action. So it's something we haven't discussed much on the DevReady podcast, but process is pivotal if you can design some product.
Yeah, all software is process. Something happens, triggers something, and moves on to the next. And that's what we just try and generally investigate that as deep as we can when we're consulting with someone.
And I mean, obviously, that's one thing with my background, allows me to look at those items and actually get a deep understanding ahead of time. So rather than necessarily having to leave that to parties such as yourselves, I can actually go and do that work, which is quite helpful in terms of both the design and the development and delivery processes, because the reality is, if you are going to engage with a company, the more information you can come prepared with, the better. And I think that's what a few people may get lost in, especially people who have never delivered projects before. And I mean, it doesn't have to be a technical project. It's just if you have never worked in project management or the like, you may not understand that if you are lacking bits of information it's going to need to be teased out at some point in the future, and sometimes it can have far-reaching consequences. So the more prepared you are, the more diligence you do, and the more design that you do up front, or at least identify, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, I think that's music to my ears, pardon the pun. But yeah, in terms of early stage, that's something that we talk about. Like the earlier you dig in terms of process, you don't want to be building any code or building a product until you really flesh out a significant amount of that process up front, just so you're clear. Even from a non-tech perspective, if you're clear on what the product looks like before it's built, that's a great place to be. Even if it might change 10, 20, 30% down the line, that's okay, but at least you've got a path that you're walking down. If you go in so blind, it becomes difficult to manage.
Yeah, and that's a really fair point. I mean, I can definitely say with FinalCall, there were positions that we started with that fundamentally changed later on once we decided to make some, forays into other product offerings, and that then required rework on decisions and what have you that we had done before. But that is the nature of product development. That is the nature of system development. You need to be flexible and not necessarily pigeonhole yourself too early on. Obviously, you talk about concepts of MVP and MMP. So if people don't know the difference, MVP is a minimum viable product, which is technically meant to be proving a hypothesis or disproving a hypothesis, whereas an MMP, being a minimum marketable product, is out there to something that you would actually put in front of your customers, that you would hope someone would pay you for.
Very nice. So
what we find through that process discovery phase is if things are left out, when we say we have to be flexible, it becomes a fine line in being flexible and then allowing like the development or consultants to make assumptions on those if they're not fleshed out enough.
And I mean, it's interesting because now you're almost talking methodology that solves these issues. So, back through various IT delivery, there's been numerous ways to deliver on these projects. In more recent times, it's been a waterfall approach, but then you've had Agile come back into the mix, and Agile as a delivery method is actually about saying, do your planning, do your design, do your delivery in smaller pieces, but think about what your end goal is rather than painting yourself into a big corner up front. And that agile delivery space is where the more you've thought about things, the more you have a good understanding and a good idea. You don't necessarily have to have the end result, and sometimes you won't actually think about some of those bits and pieces until you're actually through several sprints worth of delivery, and then you'll go, oh, hang on a minute, I need to think about this, this, and this when we're dealing with this bit over here. And I mean, it's been a fundamental shift within the IT delivery space, more so in the last sort of decade. Now that it's come back into fashion, you obviously hear people talk about being agile and having business agility and whatever else, but the reality is this is about just communicating better and delivering things in smaller amounts.
I don't think most people know what the term agile means in relation to projects and software. They just throw it out and it means they can respond to things at a whim, which is not the case like you just mentioned.
Yeah, exactly.
And in terms of agile, I think people would use it as a solution to better project management, where it's not. It's generally still whoever's managing that project's going to need to know how to cater a software product and manage it through an agile process. And what you said there is having an end goal in mind, I think still stands true, because you still need to know where you're going. How do you know where if you don't? And I've heard of stories like this where you pick up a concept and you just go and build something week to week or fortnight to fortnight, and you don't even know where you're going. But if you're on a path and on a journey to somewhere, it keeps you in line at least. Like I said, painting yourself in a corner can be something you do in a waterfall model where you completely lock yourself into a delivery, and it could be 12, 24 months, and that's a little bit crazy and risky too. So I think there's a fine balance between the two, where Agile gives you more flexibility within the development, whereas Waterfall, which is what we used to go use when we started, paints you into that corner of, now we've got to change something, and then how do we go about doing that? So yeah, it's a very interesting conversation, that one, definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not gonna bore you with my various theories on that. Having also done some consulting in this space as well, but yeah, I think some organisations believe agile is going to be the saviour of all their problems, and
that's not true.
No.
At all.
I mean, the biggest thing I see is, it's going to do it faster and it's going to do it cheaper. And it's like,
that's not true either. No. It's who's managing that and who's making the calls is going to just... Any project. You can run a waterfall project quite successfully if you know what you're doing, you've done it before. As soon as you hit a roadblock, then you're in trouble. But the same in Agile. It's exactly the same thing. It's about who's involved in it, who's the team, who's executing on it, and that's going to generally keep you in good stead if they're good people done it before.
Yeah, that's it. I think the crux of what I was getting at, and I know we've gone a long way around it, but at the same time, really worth people understanding that there are these different things out there. Yes. Go and get yourself educated in Agile. You don't have to get formal education. There's enough material online to.
There's plenty there.
You could spend days reading the free stuff out there, which would give you a good flavour for it. But ultimately, it comes back to your level of preparation. So if you're starting a business, if you've got an idea, you need to flesh out that idea as best as you possibly can, with as much detail as you possibly can. Also accepting the fact that you won't have all the answers, and sometimes things need to be talked through.
Mm-hmm. And that's okay too, provided you actually explore and dig into this thing before you go and talk to people. I think that's some good advice, because people can just, off the back of a napkin, go and have a conversation with the development team, and that's pretty scary too. Yeah,
and I mean, having said that, I'd spoken with people I'd worked with, at various points in time. Thankfully, I have worked with a number of technology people. I've worked in technology and business delivery projects, so I've picked up bits and pieces where I've needed to. But I remember having a discussion, when FinalCall was a concept, before I'd actually started the ball rolling, and I was talking with one of the project delivery managers in the IT section. I said, look, I've got this idea. What do you suggest? And he said, you're talking real-time communication. He said, Node.js is the new one. That's the one that you should be going for. That's what Facebook uses. And I'm like, well, Facebook uses it. That's what we should be using. Well, soon found out, ultimately it's exactly the path we should have gone down. We didn't go down that path initially, and we got burnt by it. So, this is all part of the journey.
It is.
That's also something to be cautious of. I can probably date the day the year at least that person said that to you, just because you said Node.js, and there was a big craze about that all at one point.
And technology goes in those crazes, so it's just something to be aware of. Anyone out there, if someone talks about a piece of tech, it's because it's it's a fad, right? It can be in a fad too sometimes.
Oh,
yeah,
completely.
It's the flavour of the month.
Yeah.
And without going into too much detail this early on, because we're trying to structure this discussion a little more. We encountered a number of technology issues along the way, because either decisions were made with the best of knowledge at the time, or we were guided by someone else who said this is the way to go, and ultimately those things backfired on us. So this is where, as a non-tech person, you need to make sure that you've got the right tech partners. You need to make sure that you've got the right input, and it's okay to have different people to talk to as well. If you know people in technology, pick their brain. They're not going to pinch your idea. Well, for the most part, I mean, excluding someone like Zuckerberg, but
well, the likelihood of them pitching it and executing is very little to none.
Exactly.
They haven't got the passion and the drive for that idea that.
And the amount of effort that you have to put into an idea in a business is phenomenal. I don't think people get it.
Oh, look, I will be the first to raise my hand to say I had no idea how much effort, how much time, you'd have to put in to try and do things. And, starting a business, you have to understand that it is a big risk. I mean, everyone's seen the stats. You've got businesses that, you get going and you think, yep, I've got a great idea, and then you try and get capital, and you can eventually get capital if you know the right people, or you're willing to tip in enough of your own money, or whatever it might be, and then it's okay. We've got this far, so have we got a market fit for the product? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Timing is the big thing. So Final Call in terms of a platform, timing wise, we didn't get right. But in terms of the product market fit, under these circumstances right now with COVID, it would have been a game changer. So I suppose we should probably actually define what Final Call as a platform was.
Yeah, so that paints a good picture about your background and history, Paul, and how you got to Final Call. So now this idea, where did it come from? So back in 2015 or pre-2015, I imagine you had this idea.
Maybe start before that. What is the idea? What is Final Call?
Yes, well, that's probably the crux of it. Final Call is a platform to enable digital negotiation and transaction of real estate assets and other high-value assets. Obviously, the idea came when I looked at people going through the whole house hunting and attempts to purchase, being friends in their 30s. Everyone knows how painful it is to deal with real estate, whether it be rentals, whether it be purchases or selling. It's a very manual, very laborious process. There is not a lot of clear information. You feel like you're getting screwed potentially at every turn as a buyer. And so, I witnessed a number of friends going through this whole house purchasing process and spending every weekend for 6+ months going to multiple open for inspections, going to multiple auctions. And we're talking of first home buyers here. And these aren't poor people, but they're by no means ridiculously wealthy people. So they're sitting there going to an auction, being told by the agent, yep, this is the price range. So you go in there with an expectation. They've spent all this time getting pre-approval from the banks and what have you. And they think, okay, this is the one. This is the one that we really think is going to be our future house, and then generally the first bid that was placed would knock them out completely.
Yeah, and that's devastating if you're in that situation. I think a few probably listening have been there, so not fun. Yeah, it's a challenging spot to be in when you're trying to buy a property, or even sell a property. I think is interesting. So picking your agent and going through that process. So both sides of it can be quite interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's something I experienced last year, buying and selling within 3 or 4 months of each other. I think it was March to June.
Yeah, it's one of those processes that you do not realise how time consuming and painful it can be until you actually start going through it. I mean, even as a tenant, you'll go through a fair bit of pain, and I remember doing that, applying for a few different rentals. It's been difficult, and subsequently I still rent, so I'm not an owner. I haven't successfully navigated that segment of the journey as yet, but a startup will probably take precedence over buying a house financially.
So that's financially churn a bit of cash.
Part of the same pain of trying to figure out what opens you were going to. I had a system. My wife couldn't believe what I used to do to try and figure out where we're going to go, what was the best route between the two, make sure we get there on time.
You just organised, mate.
And that's it. I mean, obviously the whole COVID-19 situation has gone and fundamentally changed the landscape. I think we'll see a reversion back to old practices and ways for the bulk of the industry, because most of them didn't adopt too much of a technology driven stance when they were forced to in the previous few weeks. But having said that, I think this is the commencement of the shift here in Australia and New Zealand. But I think there's going to be more of a catalyst, a more disruptive event or player that will enter the market that will actually end up driving the bulk of the change. As we see in most industries, it's you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And in the same way, you can put the best technology solutions in front of the incumbents in the industry. And the reality is, unless they feel threatened or can understand the immensity of the opportunity before them, they will not do anything different. And the real estate industry in Australia, and I'd say globally, is indicative of that to the nth degree.
Yeah, well, looking at that industry specifically, say realestate.com.au is only like one level away from becoming the agent, the virtual display home, and doing the whole process.
Yeah, which is actually really interesting because it's not technically part of their public strategy, but at the same time, if the winds change significantly enough, that is a way that they can go. I would have said prior to this they might have gone down the iBuyer route, and they might still. For context, the iBuyer route is companies like Open Door and Zillow in the US, where they actually purchase the they purchase the property at a slightly lower price than market, but they do it within 7 days in the US, and then they do some little touch-ups to it and then sell it themselves via their own platform. I know there's a number of people who are quite bullish on that model. I'd always said that model was fraught with danger purely by the fact that we hadn't experienced a recession in a while. Property prices were extended beyond most people's reach, especially here in Australia and New Zealand. But in the US, they were a little bit lower, even though they'd still seen 40% plus average growth since the GFC. But I think at some point REA or Domain might potentially move into that space, but then they're effectively moving away from being a property portal, and they can potentially kiss goodbye all of that marketing revenue income. But
that's the thing; it's killing that revenue stream for another. So
normally, what happens? If you can cannibalize your own product to make another product, the iPod to the iPhone to the iPod.
So it's an interesting conversation. And I find that interesting, that model. But yeah, like you said, if you hit a recession and you're holding 300 properties in your portfolio, all of a sudden, and they take a 10 to 20% downturn in a quick, short succession, you're in probably a bit of trouble. So yeah, interesting model.
Yeah, and I mean, it's even more interesting in the fact that, Zillow, so the equivalent of REA in the US as a property portal, decided to start moving into it, and as the dominant player, obviously they're starting to potentially cannibalize some of their own revenue. But what's been interesting is, as a publicly listed company, they've been booking the revenue in total dollar values. So they're literally sitting there saying, "Look at our revenue. Look at how much higher it is." But the margin is something like 0.2%.
Of course, the revenue is going to be higher because he's selling high-ticket items all of a
sudden. Exactly. So it's been really interesting from that perspective. So I know we've segued a little bit there, but I think key point is to understand the wider industry and the trends that are potentially following, and where the players are leading, because you can have the best idea on the planet, but execution and timing the two massive elements that you just need to try and find a way to fit as best possible to the circumstances. So going back to what we were sort of discussing, which was how I came up with this, well, I mean, that was the crux of it. I just looked at the process going, everyone's spending so much time, and yet where's the value? Like, it's literally dead time that you're spending, and the traditional process also included getting a building inspection. Well, potential purchasers are now dropping anywhere between several hundred to over $1,000 for a building inspection, and then turning up to an auction and getting outbid from the get-go. I mean, that's lost money. So now you've had people purchasing properties without building inspections up front, which means they're wearing the risk of any potential defects that have been underlying. And obviously this is what happens in a hot market where everyone wants to do it, and especially within Australia, property is an obsession. So I mean, obviously you can start sort of seeing why the idea came about, because there was a lot of potential. There was a lot of manual process, and this comes back to what I was saying earlier about processes. saw so much effort being put in by so many different participants, but yet what was the actual outcome? The outcome was a non-productive asset, a house, was transferred at the highest market value that could be achieved through a number of processes with an agent, doing a bit of marketing and doing some, vendor and client management, and ultimately the asset sold itself. So
pretty much, yeah. So marketing would be questionable. They stick it on realestate.com, and that's their marketing for some of those
people
agents.
find it if it fits them, if it's in their area.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, that's sort of where that rough idea ended up, and then it was purely a matter of why is this not being done? And if it's not going to be done by someone, then why not me? And that's really where it sort of stemmed from.
Get it. So what was your first step? So you obviously did a bit of market research, clearly looked into the industry a bit, got an understanding. Did you look overseas just to get some understanding of what was happening in US markets before you ventured this, or you start planning an idea first?
Yeah, I probably was a bit overzealous and got straight into the design and planning a little bit.
Yeah, generally happens. So
Wasn't
most
it
of the time,
back of the napkin and then finding a team?
Yeah,
planning and designing first.
It was more just picking upon my experience and my knowledge and those around me, and just try to understand the processes as they encountered it. And so I was approaching it not from an agent's perspective, but from a consumer's perspective, because my theory was, and I proved my theory incorrect through my MVP. I proved it incorrect, but my theory exactly. But my theory was that the agents would not care because they would potentially make more money out of this. So why not give them a tool that would enable them to maximize their potential earning capacity? You need to probably understand the psychology of the industry and the psychology of who you're dealing with to really understand if you're going to crack an incumbent player-controlled environment or be a disruptor. If you're the disruptor, you just need to be consumer-faced and give them the best outcome possible, whilst not necessarily completely screwing over your suppliers. But in an industry such as real estate, where you have the incumbent players, that was a mistake I made. I made the mistake of not understanding the psychology and the thought process behind how the agents operated and why they operated in certain ways that they did.
Yeah, interesting point you raise there, because you're playing two parts of the market. You need the agents as well, not just the consumers. So you got both sides there. So the agents are the ones that generally hold the property, unless you go straight to consumer and sell it yourself. They're the ones that are still holding the properties.
And that's exactly it. I mean, the interesting thing was that I didn't realize a lot of these things until well after the platform was built and operating. This was a big learning curve and a big journey that understanding all your players and understanding their motivators and drivers is one thing. Understanding why an idea could potentially fail is another thing. So it's not... I thought I had the golden goose. I thought I had the best idea on the face of the planet, and it just made perfect sense. Yes, it made perfect sense to me as a consumer that had not worked within the industry and did not understand their psychology.
I think I get that moment every time I get an idea.
Yeah, I know Anthony's one of those. Love it.
It's always the best idea.
Yeah, and as the disruptor, if you look at companies such as Uber, if you look at Airbnb, if you look at all of these parties out there that have done ridiculously well, obviously the current climate's hurt them, but prior to all of this, mostly. Prior to all of this, they've done really well because they haven't been dependent on an incumbent. So my first bit of advice, if you're ever going to come up with a big idea, make sure it's financially got a lot of legs to it. If you're dealing with incumbents, make sure you understand the industry and the incumbents and talk to them about the appetite, because there's no point in going down the path of building something when you don't have a potential client base. And I even did that with a handful of real estate agents I knew personally, and the majority of them reacted positively to it. Unfortunately, as we all know, statistical relevance, well, a handful of people does not equate to an industry.
No, it doesn't. So
is that only relevant if the incumbents are your customers, not if it's a B2C?
Yes, and hence the reason if you're dealing with an incumbent, and it's a marketplace type product especially, you have to convince them beyond what you would normally convince anyone, that this is a superior way, this is going to make their life better tenfold, 100-fold, and not endanger them. And that was one of the other things I learnt, was most of the resistance from the industry came from, one, they don't like technology. They sell real estate in the same way that they've always done historically. Two, they are scared that technology will do them out of a job.
And that's a lot of industries that are a little bit slow to react to technology. Did you go down the path of looking for one of these incumbents or a big real estate agent to be a partner in this product? Did you ever explore that?
Well, not up front. As with many of these ideas, it's really hard to go to someone you have no existing professional or personal relationship with, and propose a business idea, a proposition, a JV of some variety, without some substance behind it, without a product to show.
You need something to show. Yeah, you can't. Like you said, an idea is not going to get you there. But I feel like in a market like that, that could be an approach within the current play. If you found a big agent to work with, collaborate with, and deliver, that could be an option. But
it could. But then you now deal with the issue of who controls the industry. So, I mean, I really come back to research your industry before even spending a dollar on going down the path of building a service or a platform or whatever it might be. You have to understand the industry. You have to understand how they operate. I treated the real estate industry in the same way that I treat a lot of the other corporates. All right, there's a head office. If there's a head office, then there's a head decision maker, and they're the one. Once they make their decision, then it will cascade down, and it will be used throughout their branches. Well, what I found out was, once again, yes, there is a head office, but the head office generally, they're the franchisor. They will take, cuts of revenue and fees, and they'll provide various services and what have you. And yes, they can promote services to their network, but at the end of the day, every one of those offices was its own individual business with its own individual owners, and it was totally up to them as to whether they wanted to use something or not.
It's important to know that up front, isn't it? So you invested into the product, and I think that's some great advice here, clearly. Understand the industry you're walking into. It is a little bit easier if you're a non-tech walking into an industry. You've got domain knowledge. It's an easy place to start. If you had that real estate backing, you may have found those roadblocks a little bit earlier, which could have helped you along that journey. So research is pivotal in any space you're going into.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I learned a massive amount, which would put me in good stead for advising or running another startup or whatever it might be, because it was a lot of the errors, and those errors cost me personally financially, which is another thing that you need to sort of weigh up, is what can I afford. I've had this conversation with Daniel Mumby on a handful of occasions, and he says, you don't put in more than you can afford to lose, and that's the standard sort of investor approach. And I said, yeah, well, that's great, Daniel, but when you're building a technology platform...
It's slightly different, yeah.
Same advice you get when someone tells you that you go into the casino.
Yeah. So, it's do your research, do as much as you can without committing and going down the path of building a platform, because everything will take you longer and it will be more expensive than what you will ever anticipate, because things are more complex, especially where you're building customized applications. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't leverage existing pieces of technology out there to help shortcut. I was sort of delving earlier into some of the mistakes we made. One of those early mistakes was engaging the wrong software development company, and that one mistake cascaded into numerous issues, which resulted in $190,000 down the drain,
Wow.
10 months lost, and not a product that was working in any way, shape, or form. We had to rebuild it after that point. Now, thankfully, the government had the R&D grant out there, and I spent a lot of time, pulling all that together, and we were doing something that was innovative in terms of a technology piece and process. So we were, we did meet their criteria, but at the same time, that was only 43.5% or 45%, I think it was, for that financial year of that expenditure that I was able to get back. So, that's a lot of money to lose.
That's a hell of a lot of money, yes.
And a lot of time.
Yes.
And a lot of time. A lot of time. So we had to actually end up trying to get that platform working in the space of 2 nights. I had my team take the piece of crap that we were given by the software development company, and that software development company has since collapsed, and this is a common story by that software development company.
Okay.
It's a common story across a lot of startups.
You're not the only one.
A specific one.
Yeah.
It's a very common story. It's a lot of money and a lot of time that gets burned and wasted.
Yeah.
And a lot of it ends up being you're not technical, so you don't understand whether or not they're a good team, whether they can deliver good software. And in other cases, it's cheapest dollar drives the selection.
Well, yes, and the interesting thing was I didn't actually go for the cheapest dollar in this instance.
So that's an outlier, I would say.
Yeah.
And then one other thing just on top of that is if anyone's providing you like a fixed price quote up front, I say that's a big red flag, because it's impossible to do that from any sort of discussion on any sort of system.
So it wasn't a fixed price quote purely on here's a discussion and this is what it was. There was a 2-day workshop. There was time where they spent pulling together the user stories and epics. Once again, an agile terminology. So go out there and understand agile, because that's how most people develop. And look.
At least they tried to have that process, the discovery and planning stage.
So let's dig in a bit on that, because that's obviously not something you want to go through, and we don't want anyone to go through. And
no,
the reason why we started this podcast, Paul, is we've heard this story time and time and time again, and it's a shit story to hear that people are investing their own money, their own capital, friends, families' capital, whatever it might be, and they get put in a position where they're dealing with a team that just is not even capable of delivering, and it's a massive frustration for us. It's like you're taking people's I'm having a bit of a dig here, but you're putting your capability out there. You're taking people's money, and some people are just taking it on a ride, and we've seen this over and over again. So what's some red flags that you noticed early on or during that process that people might want to pay attention to?
So the design process didn't bother me. I went through the design process. There were screen mock-ups, there was screen flows. It made sense. They incorporated all my feedback. So, from a design perspective, from a user story perspective, all the questions were answered. There was enough flexibility to deal with the unknowns as they came up, and as we got closer to those, pieces of those user stories being dealt with in each relevant sprint.
Yes.
So, that was okay.
Okay.
It was sprint 1. Okay, sprint 1's like setting things up. Sprint 1, I mean, I was told it was standard practice for them to take ownership of the development environment, which we'd established in AWS. And I thought, Okay. I don't know, but okay, fine, I'll take that one. I haven't actually spoken with anyone since to find out whether that's still standard practice. I mean, I understand their position is they don't want someone then walking away from paying what they're due, but at the same time, there's got to be a better way than holding people to ransom like that.
Yeah, okay.
So that was a yellow card for me. but I thought, okay, I'll just deal with it and it's fine. But then it was second sprint. And they were actually running weekly sprints, so normally a sprint/iteration is 2 weeks, but this was weekly.
How big was the team working on the project? Did you know?
I had an onshore digital producer, a sort of relationship manager who I dealt with initially as well. There was a scrum master sitting offshore in India. He had a team of, I believe, from memory, it was 7 or 8 people, I think, all up. So you think, okay, well, this is a decent-sized team. And what we're talking about is building a secure real-time communication method with a bit of a marketplace front end and some user registration functionality and some user management functionality. So, nothing necessarily over the top, but the real-time communication, reliable and secure. It's a new piece of technology. You're having to build something. So, okay, fine. But Sprint 2, where they're starting on some of the UI work, and they're building a basic user interface, and we're talking a property card. And they designed it, and I'm expecting them to design it exactly as what's been produced in the visual mock-ups to us previously. And I look at it and go, well, the alignment on that's wrong. Like, why is that image out of whack? Like, it's not centered in where it should be within that portion of the card. And then what happens when you put some more content in there? Like, if there's more characters in there than just what you've put. And so, I had them run a few little variable tests like this, and then I'm looking at the outputs going, that's wrong. Like, just visually, that's not even close to right. You're talking overflow of characters outside of a card. So it's not a flexible dimension of a card. And you're thinking, oh, okay, that's a bit weird. Or there's no way of, at least curating it in such a way that it can shorten the information so it still looks presentable. But then, we end up having a look, and this is where, unfortunately, for those non-tech people, you need to have a tech person involved, and I did have my CTO involved, thankfully, who I'd got involved in the business, and we're inspecting some of the UI attributes, the CSS, and we're just looking at it going, they've literally counted the number of pixels. So rather than actually fix the issue in a proper way, they've literally just gone and adjusted the pixel count, so it's moved the attribute on the screen either right or left by a certain number of pixels. And I'm like, but that's not fixing the underlying problem. You're just band-aiding.
And so, if you didn't have a CTO, you wouldn't have known that. So what was your next step then? What did you do?
Well, I was quite blunt in terms of my feedback and said, hang on a minute, we've gone through this. You're telling me that this is the fix, and we can clearly tell that it's not. So we want this actually properly fixed. And sad to say, but I parked the UI stuff and I said, look, let's get on with things. Yep, we can deal with the UI stuff, because ultimately that is not highly complex. It's quite basic stuff that you can deal with later on. I wanted to get to the crux of the application, which is the real-time communication. And they're like, all right, so we're going to use XMPP as the methodology. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know what that is, because I am technical, but I'm not that technical. And I said, well, why aren't we using Node.js? That's what I was told by friends. That was the standard, as we discussed earlier. And they said, oh, no, XMPP is what Google uses. And I was like, okay, like, if that's the protocol they're using, it's Google, like, Google know their stuff. coincidentally, if you've ever used Hangouts, which I know you guys have,
Yes.
but for anyone who's listening to this, if you've used Hangouts and you've found that sometimes it doesn't always pop through your notifications, or it seems a bit skew-if in terms of timing of sending messages, that's some of the downfall of XMPP.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just a specific protocol.
Yes.
Yeah. So weeks are going by,
So the
and
real-time
I'm getting these weekly
communication is a
deliveries.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I'm spending hours of my time each night, and,
Yes.
on the weekends, and I'm having multiple phone calls, and that's the other thing. Whenever you're going through any software delivery, you need to be on top of the development, and you need to be on top of how it's progressing, and you need to be testing yourself and providing feedback. So this comes back to my process discussion earlier. You need to understand your process and how things are meant to flow, and you need to think about the implications of, if I do this, if I click on this thing, this is what I want it to do.
So you effectively became one of the testers, the QA people on the team.
Well,
And
yeah.
then project management, I'm guessing, with all the phone calls and emails that you had to do.
Yeah.
Was that challenge with the offshore and the time difference? Was that a problem?
So I was working full-time during the day,
Uh-huh.
and then I'd come home and spend several hours working on this at night, and sometimes the phone calls were generally scheduled from 7 to 8 p.m. Every night, and sometimes they'd run over, and then sometimes I'd have to have further debate with the Scrum Master. And I think that's another big red flag through that whole process was absolute defensiveness the whole way through from the development team, or the Scrum Master at least, trying to tell me how my expectations are not right, or saying that they'll do something and then not doing it. I've always been the type of person that is expected, if you tell me you're going to get something done, you either have to have a really good reason as to why you haven't been able to get it done, and it's got to be plausible, or you get it done. Like that's a reasonable expectation when you're paying a company tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to deliver on something for you.
It is, and I think one thing you raised there, and it's like anything within project development, you're going to have your bottlenecks, you're going to have a few challenges, but if you're constantly getting that feedback of we haven't delivered every single time, that's a massive red flag, clearly, because they're not, maybe they're not even capable, and they're just walking you through this process, and that's a big issue.
They're underestimating it themselves.
Yeah.
And that's normally what we've seen is the case for them.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. And for me, it was...
But like you said, you're paying these people as experts to deliver for you.
That's your expectation. And
Yeah.
that's in a right. You're spending $200,000 on a product. One would expect that they're experts delivering a product.
Well, I mean, going back to my statement earlier that this company has since collapsed, I mean, some people who have dealt with the industry and known for the last few years, some of these companies that have collapsed could quite easily figure out a short list of who it was.
Who it might be. Yeah.
Look, you and I have had that discussion already, but what was really frustrating was being told that I'm not, that my expectations are incorrect, or that I'm not right when I'm UATing. For those out there that don't know that, user acceptance testing. So that's what you as a founder should be doing every sprint to make sure that the delivered work is actually functioning as it should. You're being told that this is correct and that you're wrong in your expectations or whatever it might be. And I remember distinctly just having yelling matches with the offshore Scrum Master. I'm sitting there saying, this isn't working. Like, it's not... So they'd give me a walkthrough and they'd say, here, look, we've demonstrated it to you, it works. And I'm like, yeah, it worked one time. Now, when I've done UAT on it, every fourth time or 1 in 4 attempts, there's a failure, which means it doesn't work. And you as a founder, it's your business. It's your reputation, but more importantly, it's you financially on the line. So if I had taken their product as it was and put it into a live environment and let a real estate agent run an auction with that platform as it was that they'd given us, 1 in 4 potentially even 1 in 3 online bids would have failed to come through. And if it had been potentially a winning bid that someone online had placed that didn't get communicated, and mind you, it's saying on their side it was communicating.
Yep.
Think about the legal ramification and the legal liability that you as a founder and me subsequently in that scenario would have been. So, hence the reason I was quite pissed off. I can't put it any other way.
And supposedly you were both working from the same designs.
Yes.
And
same
user
plans,
stories
user
and
stories,
flow requirements, everything.
Yep. And in actuality, I was producing even more because there were certain concepts that they couldn't get. So I would literally have to draw up flow diagrams for them to step it out in plain English.
So what was the point of the onshore design digital manager? What did they do? If you're dealing directly with the offshore team, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, that's a very good question. I actually don't know what value I was getting out of them. And look, not to be disparaging, but in terms of offshore development, I've dealt with offshore development across numerous organizations since as far back as 2006. And my experience has not been fantastic. There's been a handful that have done what they needed to do, but there are also a lot of companies that will not deliver. And you can manage them to the nth degree, and you can even fly over there. One organisation I worked at literally had that, had a software development partner in India, and they'd fly people over there to project manage and work alongside, and they'd even send along tech leads, and then the end result was still a very average piece of technology that didn't work most of the time. So. Yeah,
it's not easy, that world, and we've heard for every 100 I hear, one is a success in my opinion in terms of delivering clear quality continuously. You don't hear good stories, so unless
it's even worse when the startups and founders go and find their own team overseas and try and manage the project.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other kettle.
Without having that technical level at all. I don't know how many of those we've spoken to over the.
I remember a guy. I won't name him, but I remember a guy I was dealing with in a team in Eastern Europe, and he.
Well, that was the third team, though. I think.
Yeah, I don't even know what it was. But
2 through India, one in. Where did he end up in Russia or the Ukraine?
I was thinking Ukrainian team, but he ended up flying to Ukraine and staying a couple of months there trying to build this thing and still don't get a product to market. And you're thinking, my God, that was our first venture into trying to help him manage this thing. In about 2 weeks, we gave up. We said, listen, I won't name his name, but we said, listen, we just can't. They don't listen. They don't comprehend. They're not following any instruction at all. How do you expect us to help you manage this thing? And he goes, I'm just going to fly there and hold their hand, and it just didn't work. And
he wasn't tech-based, didn't have any experience developing software here, and he'd gone through 2 failed projects before, I think it was.
If they're not,
look, if you're going to do as a non-technical founder, if you're going to try and start a technical platform startup, you need to engage the right people, and ultimately, I know people say you don't need a technical founder, but I'd argue against that. I think having a technical founder means you can actually start discussing those items with someone else who has a vested interest. Who
they've got some skin in the game, right? So they've got they're a part of the process. And we've had this chat with a few people. Do we get an advisor? Do we get a technical founder or a co-founder? I'm sort of leaning towards the fact that, like, Anthony and I work hand in hand within a technology business. If I didn't have Anthony and couldn't rely on Anthony, there's no way we could deliver anything. I'm not the technical guy.
Technical one.
And you need that person to lean on that you fully trust and know that they're going to deliver the outcome, or they're making the right decision. if you're just relying on a third party, and if that third party is overseas to make the right decisions for your product, your business, long term, when they're just looking at it as another project they're doing, you're going to be in quite a bit of strife.
Now, in saying that, we are advisors on products
Yes.
overseas for other clients.
Yes.
And we know ourselves that we're putting our all in when we work on a project. We hope we're getting that across to them, so it's not the same as these situations that we're talking about. We know we try and put our best in to get these things across the line and deliver the best we can.
And just going back 10...
I didn't mean to dig you guys a hole by the way.
No, but we're in both situations. We've done both.
We've had our struggles. We've been running a tech business for 12 years now. When we started, we had our struggles. We missed deadlines. We struggled as a team to deliver inexperience. But the one thing that we can hold a hat on, we never stopped attempting to deliver, and we never failed to deliver anything. It might have been late, it might have been delayed, but we still consistent and helped the customer get to the end result. And that's you don't get that everywhere. And that's one thing we hold a hat on, even though we probably didn't have some experience back in the day to be able to deliver to what we thought we could, but at least we did everything we could, even if it went over and over and over. We lost money on projects back then, like not making anything.
But you know what? That's you as the technical business. That is something that is just par for the course.
It is.
As a non-technical founder, especially if you're dealing with you're someone who's never worked in project delivery before.
Correct.
I mean, thankfully, I've done it for well over a decade. I had seen one project come in on time and budget. One.
And that's
in that decade plus. So
it's not that easy. This stuff is challenging. It is. It's massively
very
challenging.
difficult.
So, and I think people don't get it, especially if you're non-tech. It's very hard to understand that.
We've been on all sides of the fence in those 12 years.
Pretty much.
We've been advisors, we've been partners, we've been working as remote developers for another team, as overflow support.
We run our own SaaS product. We've got our own product. We've invested heavily over the past 4 or 5 years. So we've seen all areas, all angles, all facets of it. So
and we've even been tech founders on startups and brought in through sweat equity, as well as advisors. So we've done a bit of everything. So we've gone on all the fences. So we know that it does work if you get the right people. But a technical founder is better than a technical advisor.
Exactly, and that's the critical thing is it comes back down to having the right people engaged. You just, if you as a founder are looking at starting a business, I come back to what I was saying earlier, and I'll probably add a few little elements to it. Is understand your industry, understand your target market, and actually talk to them. Most of them, and when I say most of them, 99.9% of them are going to give you actual useful information and feedback, and they're not going to steal your idea. And even if they did try and steal your idea, most of them have no actual way of delivering. Which, I know I'm contradicting myself, but having said that, actually, one of the people I did demo my platform to actually did steal my whole concept and idea. So,
nice.
There's that.
There's that. You can't stop that though, but that's...
No, you can't. I mean, that's just market research at the end of the day.
That people have the same idea at the same time.
That's true.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
I had it with Gavel. Gavel came out at the same time. Now, theirs was a slightly different spin on what our platform was.
Yes.
Their delivery model was different. They went the Uber-style route where they controlled the resources and just sold it to the agents as here is a service that we offer you. You just need to pay us $100, $200, and we do the bits and pieces for you. So you don't need to do anything. Whereas our platform was self-service. Now, once again, I come back to I didn't understand well enough the target market and what their appetite was for dealing with technology.
Yeah, that's a key point from today. You mentioned it 1,000 times, so I think everyone should listen to that. Understand the market.
I just don't know how much more I can emphasise it. If I could underline it, bold it, understand, research.
Say it one more time. Yes. Maybe we'll call that the title of the episode. Understand your market. And put a bullseye picture or something.
Yeah, and subsequently, there were more ideas that came to the fore as this went on. And if you're creative enough, whilst you're working through this, other ideas will come to a head for you. You'll be working through a particular problem, or you'll get some feedback from your users, and that's another important thing. I've done digital product owner and digital product management roles as well, where you interact with your users and talking to them, getting feedback, literally showing them screen mock-ups, saying, hey, if we did this thing, like, what do you reckon of that? Like, don't be afraid to get feedback from people on your idea, because most people that see your idea will actually give you valuable information and valuable feedback. The bulk of them are going to be too lazy or just not have an opportunity to take on your idea and do anything about it in terms of pinching it.
That's a fair point. I think people be aware of that.
Look,
yes.
People said it to me as well, and I was. They said it to me after the fact, so I learned the hard way once again. It's just, you need to just understand this. Once you understand it, and don't feel afraid about it, even if you're going through the whole motions of trying to raise capital, and no doubt you'll have discussions around capital raising to some degree with other parties. But I mean, my experience with it is, where you're talking about sophisticated investors, where you're talking about family offices, where you're talking about venture capital funds, all these different markets, you need to understand their drivers. So, that research element that I highlighted earlier applies to not just your platform and software design and development, but it also applies to your capital raising. It literally, research is going to be the biggest component of you operating a business. Yes, there's the other operational elements, but the stuff that will take the most time is research and relationship building.
And I think it's sure relationship building at the end there, but it's pivotal to any business success. The more people you know, and if you build and add value to a market, it makes it a lot easier to have conversations, especially if you're going to feedback and get questions and answers from a market.
And even going back to the development team, they become it's a relationship.
It is.
Not just transactional. You need to be able to work with them. Like you said, you were talking to them all day, all night, every day, every night. It's not just a transactional relationship at that point.
So, Paul, just to get a grip on this, so you went 200 grand in, first product, failed. What did you do next? So this was what, 2016, 17-ish? Went through that?
2016.
Yeah. So what was your next step? So what did you attempt to do?
So the next step was, I'd actually made the decision along with the CTO and another friend of mine who I brought on board. I had more capital, which was basically, let's go and work on this full time.
Okay, so you were able to do that at this time. Yeah, okay.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, it wasn't easy, and financially, losing the income that I had was a big hit. And if you're going to do that, do your sums, do your finances, plan ahead. That's all you can do. And if you've got a girlfriend or a wife, make sure you have that conversation in depth.
Just don't do it.
That was fun.
Okay.
So, I mean, I got married and was the CEO and head of product for a startup and had no income.
Nice.
So, that was
not
a
easy.
fun time.
No, not easy to go through that, is it?
No. So, these are just the bits and pieces. So, we went through that and rebuilt the platform and, went out pitching it to different real estate agencies, speaking with the CEOs, some of the principals, directors, all that type of stuff. And, incorporating feedback. What I encountered was a lot of resistance. Now, if I had done more of that engagement and market research up front, I would have known what the resistance was, which means I could have factored in some of those into the design of the platform. But also, I would have known, right, it would have informed me at that point in time, is this actually worth pursuing at this point in time? And I've actually said it to a number of friends before. If I'd known then what I knew now, and this was progressive points along the way, would I have pursued it? Probably not. there was opportunity cost in terms of lost income. There was income lost that I actually tipped into the business myself. And there's all of those things that sort of go along with it. So you have to understand that being an entrepreneur is a gamble, and it is a gamble. Startups fail. Only
a lot of them do. Yes.
Yeah, only point something of a percent actually end up becoming successful businesses. So, if you're going to pursue it, you have to understand that you have the best of intentions. You might have a wealth of experience. You may have the best idea, but it can still fail.
Yeah, and I think you need to start from there and realise that if you're walking into that, I think it's when you do your sums up front, understand that this might fail. And I think you mentioned Dan Mumby, what are you prepared to risk? And I think at time becomes a factor, let alone a monetary thing, opportunity cost. And it all needs to be weighed up. And I think starting out up front, how long are you going to give this? Especially when you're in a startup land and you've got no revenue for year on year and you're trying to build a product. It's not easy. It's challenging. How long can you actually give it to see it through and to see yourself to the other side to hopefully generate revenue and become one of those 1 in 100 that actually generates good business? And it's not that easy, is it?
No, it's not. And I mean, I'd probably add to that as a founder, one of the things that you go is, I want to own as much of this company as I can, because you think if it's successful, I want to be really successful.
Yes.
I want to make the most money I possibly can and get the most kudos, and I want to be the equivalent of Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or numerous other ridiculously wealthy people. But the practical reality is, unless you can bootstrap your startup and fund the whole thing yourself and not have to rely on outside capital, you are realistically going to have to carve out reasonable capital holdings or equity holdings to other people for that capital to get the business going. Now, there's a lot of dumb money out there. What do I mean by dumb money? Dumb money is there are people with money looking for investments to make them money, but they can't actually add any value to either your operations or your strategy or whatever it might be. So this could be, your family and friends. Yeah, cool, you can tap them if you want, but at the same time, what value do they potentially bring in? Not much.
Little to nothing other than actual money, and that's all it is. Yeah.
Exactly. So what you're better off doing is spending the time pulling together a very well researched, framing of it. It doesn't need to be an official pitch deck. I mean, obviously that helps you in discussions with investors, but if you can just frame up the concept into a bit of a story flow, describe what you're sort of roughly talking about, what the problem statement is, go down into why these are a problem and how these are a problem. Size up your market. I mean, you have to understand how big your potential market is. And yes, if you're creating a new market, which, there are some of those instances out there, like, we were almost effectively doing that, it can be hard to calculate, but you need to make the investment seem appealing, but more importantly, you need to have the right people involved, because it's not the idea that investors are investing in. I know it sounds cliche, but it really isn't. It's not the idea, it's the team. Can the team execute?
And we've heard it. We had a podcast with a VC a few weeks back. Hasn't been published yet, but one of the things he said was, yes, I'm an investor, but I like to be involved because I'm putting money into this thing. And if I can help move this along, that's win for the owner, win for me. It's all about the team. And he spoke about even that single founders, and he doesn't invest them anymore because just a single founder can be challenging to work with, and they're just doing their own thing. Sometimes, you need a bit of other people's input within a business. And you mentioned carving out a business into multiple pieces, and you struggle with this, and we all do. I think early days saying, if I own 100% of this or whatever it is, it could be worth a lot. But bringing on that right person, that right partner, that right investor can make the business work. On your own, sometimes you're going on hiding to nothing. So, some really good advice there, Paul.
Well, that's exactly it. And I mean, prior to us obviously recording this podcast, you and I were just sort of briefly talking about that idea that I'm looking at right now, and I think it's got legs, and I think it could be one of those big unicorn plus type valuation businesses in the future. And you know what? If I can have 20%, 10% of that, at that type of valuation, it's going to make me a lot better off than what I am now, where I own, I own 100% of a concept.
And was from that there, is that thinking change just based on what you've been through and the experience that you had? Obviously, FinalCall, you've stopped and closed. It just didn't seem to get over the line technically from what you said. So is that from that, or did you own most of FinalCall? What was the structure there, and what learning do you take from that?
I am majority shareholder, but as we pointed out, 100% of nothing is nothing. The unfortunate thing we had with FinalCall, when we were finally starting to make traction, and this is prior to the COVID situation, which actually would have potentially increased our customer base.
Yeah, that's what I thought. When I was speaking to you back in, I don't know, a month ago, I was thinking, this Paul could be in a good position right now. Obviously, that hasn't come to fruition.
Serendipity did not go in my favour, unfortunately. So this comes back to a decision we made in 2016 during the rebuild. We talk about technical decisions, or we talk about decisions that you can make that have far-reaching implications. So that decision engaging with that software company was bad decision number one. Their architectural decisions, bad decision number two. We re-architected it and redesigned the application, and then encountered a challenge where we said, okay, if we use this framework over here, it'll give us this, this, and this. If we use this framework over here, it'll give us this, this, and this. But nothing actually fit what we needed. So what did we do? We decided to custom build our own, which is a lot more effort, but it gave us exactly what we needed. Now, at the time, React and Angular neither of them were the front runners, and they were both relatively new. So, if you were to pin your hopes on one of those frameworks, it just as easily could have failed for you as well. We built the platform on the architecture in 2016, did not update the architecture, and unfortunately in March this year, or early March this year, we encountered a fatal error in the platform that stopped secure communications because our customized framework had not been updated along with browsers. So, that's one thing. If you're doing a tech platform, you have to understand that what you build now has a shelf life. You need to be constantly updating. If you're building a native app for iOS or Android, those updates are even more frequent. You'll be updating those things multiple times a year with each new firmware update. If you're doing a web application, like we did, we had a bit more grace in terms of time in there, but a 3-year run, hey, it ain't bad. But unfortunately, just as we would have finally achieved our product market fit, and by the way, hadn't actually added a single feature since 2017. So we were ahead of our time, which comes back to timing. It's unfortunate. It's not to say that it's dead. I mean, if there's a way to rebuild it, and if I can, reposition things, then there's that. But I suppose that's one other key element as a founder. Make sure you're creative in terms of pivots, because we pivoted multiple times in terms of product features, things that I swore I never wanted to get involved in, swore that I was never going to build into the platform, and then just to keep up with other entrants in the market, sometimes you have to do things that you didn't plan on doing, even though you knew it didn't necessarily add a whole heap of value.
Just to be competitive.
It's an interesting conversation. I think if you take it back to any business, I think 50 years ago business could do the same thing for 10, 15, 20 years. I think now we're in a different world where you need to be pivoting, even if you're not in a tech business. pivoting services, pivoting business model, pivoting the way you consider your market, pivoting who your market is. And in tech, it's even more advanced there because you're always changing, always evolving, and offering.
Everything's just accelerated. It is. That 10, 15 years is 18, 24 months.
So I think
it can be.
Be aware of that.
Oh, exactly. I mean, you could even go so far as to say, literally, the whole COVID situation has just forced every business in every industry to pivot. Pubs are up a creek right now, but you've got a few that are now able to do some takeaway beers and what have you, and some of them are setting themselves up as temporary bottle shops and things like that. Now, that's not really going to do much for them. But restaurants, so you've had traditional restaurants, even high-end ones. I mean, Attica's
I saw that on the news
restaurant
the other
in the
night.
world.
Talking about that. So, yes.
They've pivoted to do takeaway, cook-at-home type meals. Like, it's just... if you want to survive in business, you need to be flexible.
Yes.
Not morally, because, morally as well. Like, if you really want to be that kind of person.
Everyone's got a choice there.
Exactly. Yes. But you just need to be flexible, and you need to understand that the world will change. Your business circumstances will change. You could be top of the heap. You could be the market leader, but it will not always be that way. And there are always people looking to disrupt you. There are always people looking to disrupt industries. There are always threats out there, and there are always opportunities out there, and you need to be cognizant of them. That's not to say don't invest and don't take risks, but because they could potentially not work out. Just be educated about it, which comes back to team. Have the right team around you, have the right advisors, and you don't need to be paying people, you don't need to be doing this. I mean, just tap the people that you know within your network that you've got good relationships with, who are happy to get involved, because half of the time, in the early stages of a business, people are happy to help out, provided it's not too onerous, but they're happy to help out and give their input and give their time and give their thoughts to you, because intrinsically most people will want to see you succeed.
Yes.
And if you succeed, and that you've been there helping... if you succeed and they've been there helping you along the way, well, there's also the potential that they might have skills that can be utilised later on. They might become part of your board. They might become a key executive member or a key senior management member. Like, you just don't know how any of this stuff could play out. So networking is important. And sales, God, that's the last thing I have to say.
We'll wrap it up with sales. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Sales. Do not in any way underestimate how much you need to invest in sales and marketing. Marketing, marketing is about brand recognition and getting the message out there, but marketing will not sell for you.
Agree.
Sales, people, business development, relationships, that is the stuff that will sell. And sometimes, a sale, you could spend 6 months plus negotiating and doing whatever it is. I did for a very large commercial real estate agency. I spent over 6 months adapting the platform for little variances that they wanted and whatever else, and ultimately they just decided no, they didn't want to do it in the end. And that's just part and parcel of what you do. But once again, useful feedback, take it on board. You might get some new ideas out of it, which we did, which other competitors copied in the end. So,
you've got to be prepared for that. So, Paul, I think I want to thank you for coming on. It's not easy to come on and share a story that hasn't gone to plan. Obviously, I imagine you can share a story about FinalCall just selling 50 auctions a weekend, but unfortunately it's not where you are right now. That may change in the future, but I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing what the experience has been like, what starting a business is really like, and the challenges you might find, especially if you go down this whole tech-facing business. So I want to, really appreciate you coming on, mate, and just sharing what your story's been like and what the experience has been. And there's a lot of content here for people just to take away and have a good think about before they get into a business, or even if they're in one right now.
Yeah. No, look, thanks for having me.
One thing we can leave you with is that you're not the only one who've gone through a situation
like
this.
And that's...
From everyone we've spoken to.
Like I said earlier, the point of why we started this, back in October last year, we had 5 businesses, lost about a bit over $1 million between them, some small, some bigger. And we started the podcast off the back of it. And you listened to our first podcast, Judy Selman's number one. She was one of those. And I think the reason why we did it was, how do we add value to these people? Because, yeah,
she lost
400 grand. Yeah, I think Paul's a bit more than that based on our previous conversations. So it's not fun. It's not good when people have ideas. And the last thing you want is crap tech holding you back. Yeah, because not because your idea was no good. Yeah,
100%. You need to. You just need to do everything you can to make it work, and also not be bummed out, not be too bummed out if it doesn't.
Yeah. Life goes on, doesn't it? There's another opportunity around the corner, and who knows what that might be for you.
Most successful entrepreneurs fail multiple times before they succeed.
Yeah, the average age of a successful entrepreneur is about 45. So
we're not there yet.
It's a lot. There's a lot of failures along the way before you get that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, if anyone wants to reach out, talk a bit to you, how do they get access to you, and where might they reach you?
You can drop me an email at paul.arnost@finalcall.com.au, and we can just have a chat. And I'm always I love the startup space. If I can make it work financially, it's exactly where I'd want to be.
It's a fun place to play, isn't it? It's just it is that financial thing. How do you make it work on both sides? It's creative.
Exactly.
It's enjoying, but the revenue side is somewhat the challenge sometimes. Thanks again, Paul. We'll share it out on LinkedIn, so I'll share it